Alright, what's going on guys? Today, we're going to take a look at another World Championship winning deck in Magic the Gathering's history. And this time, it's going to be Doran Rock, a green-black rock-style control deck that won the World Championship in 2007. It did have a small white splash, but basically it was the green-black rock archetype you might be familiar with. Standard at the time was composed of the Time Spiral block, one of my favorites, the Lorwyn block, and the 10th edition core set. And what's interesting about Lorwyn is it would bring the first Planeswalker cards ever printed, a couple of which are featured in this deck. Anyway, the tournament would take place in New York City, and the deck would be piloted by Uri Peleg. So let's start with the deck's namesake, Doran the Siege Tower. Yeah, this might not seem like something you would see in a competitive deck, right? It's a 3-mana 0/5 that says creatures assign combat damage with their toughness instead of their power. That seems pretty janky. Now this is a popular card among, casual jank players, but you wouldn't think that it would be competitive. Here's the thing, the deck wasn't built around Doran exactly. It's not looking to fill the board with a bunch of useless walls and then hope that it can keep Doran in play. That's not what this deck is doing at all. This was basically just a black-green control deck, and it just played Doran as a 3-mana 5/5 beater. That's it. This is a 3-mana 5/5. I mean, it's a 3-mana 0/5 that deals 5 damage when it deals damage. So basically, it's a 3-mana 5/5. And this deck could get it out on turn 2 because it played Llanowar Elves and Birds of Paradise, which meant you could get a turn 2 5/5 in standard, which is pretty good. Also, it just so happens that Doran allows the Birds of Paradise to attack because it can attack for 1 damage. So that's a nice little bonus too. So you actually get to attack for 6 the following turn. So that's pretty fast. And that was basically it. It didn't have to have Doran. It didn't have a whole bunch of useless walls. It was just, here's the 5/5 for 3 that you could get out on turn 2. Pretty cool. In addition to Doran, the deck also played Tarmogoyf, Hypnotic Spectre, and Oran Viper. Tarmogoyf is a classic control finisher because for 2 mana you get a pretty massive creature. If you play Modern, you're probably familiar with it, particularly in decks like Jund and certain Death Shadow decks. It just gets bigger based on the number of card types and graveyards. So when you're making your opponent discard cards and you're blowing up all their permanents, it's usually pretty big. Also, Doran actually makes it more powerful because it has 1 more toughness than it has power, so when you have Doran in play, it actually gets an extra point of power basically. The Spectre, on the other hand, is a 2/2 flyer that forces the opponent to discard a card at random when it connects. And yeah, that's at random, so that's pretty decent. And then the Oran Viper was actually a standard staple back in the day. It's a 3-mana 1/3 with basically Death Touch, and if it connects with the opponent, you get to draw a card. So it worked as a pseudo removal spell if you left it on defense, and if you have effectively cleared the board, then you can just start, gaining card advantage to stabilize and take over the game, which control decks, they typically like to do that. Makes sense. And that also just so happens to get more powerful with Doran. And again, that wasn't the goal here. It just, just by happenstance, there's a lot of synergy there. It didn't play the Viper just for Doran. It just so happens that, they happen to be synergistic. So pretty nice. Alright, now moving on to the control portion of the deck, it played Thoughtseize and Profane Command. Thoughtseize is another Modern staple. 1 mana to rip any non-land card out of your opponent's hand is pretty amazing, even if you do lose 2 life. Profane Command might sound familiar if you play Modern as well, as it's part of the same cycle as Cryptic Command. In this case, you pay X, and then depending on how much you spent, you can make the opponent lose life, return a creature card from your graveyard to play, and that's to play, not to your hand, give a creature -X/-X, or give a bunch of creatures fear, which means that they can't be blocked except by artifact creatures or black creatures. And of course, you get to choose 2 of those. So it's pretty versatile. It's good in a grindy control deck because you can blow up a creature and return 1 from your graveyard to play, and that can be like a really swingy play. It's great card advantage, especially since there's actually a creature that kills a creature when it enters the battlefield that we'll look at soon. So you can blow up a creature, bring back a creature, and then that creature can kill a creature. And that's basically like what a control deck wants to do. But the fact that you could also make the opponent lose X life and make all of your creatures basically kind of unblockable also made this card actually a game finisher. So it's a great control card, but also a finisher. So pretty nice. After that, it played Shriek Maul, Nameless Inversion, and Eye Blight's Ending as board control. So Shriek Maul is the creature I was talking about. It costs 5 mana for a 3/2 with Fear, which is not great, but it blows up a non-black, non-artifact creature when it comes into play. So it's a little little clunky, but it has evoke. So if we pay 2 mana, we essentially cast the spell as if it were a Doomblade, or I guess more accurately a Terror, but it just so happens that in the late game, when we have extra mana sitting around, we can just cast it and get the 3/2 with Fear as a nice little bonus. And then again, it works really well with Profane Command, because we can blow up a creature, return this to the battlefield, and then have Shriek Maw blow up a creature, so we kill 2 creatures and have a 3/2 with Fear on the battlefield. Not bad. Nameless Inversion gives a creature +3/-3, so basically it kills a creature with toughness 3 or less, but it could also be used as a combat trick if you had, say, Doran. Say the opponent attacks with a 6/6. If you target it with Nameless Inversion, it becomes a 9/3, but it assigns combat damage equal to its toughness, so it's effectively a 3/3, which allows you to block and kill it potentially, so that's pretty handy. Oh, and it's a tribal card too, so that's an extra card type for Tarmogoyf. And then Eyeblight's ending, well, that's pretty simple. 3 mana instant speed, kill a non-elf. And then finally the deck played Liliana Vest and Garruk Wildspeaker. Yep, even though these original Planeswalkers were pretty weak by today's standards, they were still pretty dominant in Standard. Go figure. Anyway, Liliana is Tarmogoyf's best friend, and even if this isn't Liliana of the Veil, it still forced the opponent to discard cards, feeding the Goyf. She could also tutor up cards from your library, and if you manage to ultimate her, she returns every creature card from all graveyards to the battlefield under your control. And then Garruk, on the other hand, was just super powerful at the time. First off, he could untap 2 lands, so he ramped you. Plus, you could play him and then untap 2 lands, so you could hold up a creature removal spell, at least in this deck. For -1, you could put a 3/3 beast token into play, and that was what made Garruk so powerful. The value you could generate just from pumping out 3/3s was pretty crazy. I mean, 3/3s are pretty big just to get, like free ones every turn. And both of these 2 abilities meant that he could effectively protect himself. You can make sure you have untapped lands to kill creatures that would attack him, or just put out a blocker. Also, if you did manage to ultimate him, which actually isn't that difficult because it only requires -4, and he starts with 3 loyalty counters, then you basically got to cast a free overrun, which is fine, I guess. It's not that crazy, but, it's also not very difficult to activate, so, yeah, it's fine. You could actually win the game with that, so, yeah, not the most craziest ultimate, but also fairly easy to get there. And that's the deck. That is Doran Rock. Moving on to the mana base, it played Brushland, Caves of Koilos, and Llanowar Waste, which are all pain lands that produce green, black, and white. It also played Guiltleaf Palace and Horizon Canopy. The Palace is a green-black dual land that doesn't actually come into play tapped if you can reveal an elf card. And the Canopy, of course, can add green or white at the cost of 1 life, but it can be cracked for a free card if you're flooded, which is a super nice bonus. The deck also played Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, and Pendelhaven. Urborg allows all of your lands to produce black mana, and Pendelhaven can give a 1/1 creature +1/+2. And the reason that deck played these is because there's basically no drawback for doing so. I mean, literally the only target for Pendelhaven in the entire deck was Llanowar Elves, but at the same time, why not? It's not like the card comes into play tapped or anything, so basically it's just, maybe you'll get to do that or not, and it doesn't really matter that much. Although 2 copies of Urborg is a little sketchy, because you could draw 2 of them, and that's less good because they are legendary. And then the deck played Gemstone Mine and a single forest. Gemstone Mine can tap for any color 3 times, but then it has to be sacrificed, and the forest can be tapped for green mana, but you probably knew that already. And then moving on to the sideboard, as always, we won't go too in depth here as that requires an understanding of the entire metagame, but the deck played Stupor that forces the opponent to discard 2 cards, 1 at random, and Noth of the Guiltleaf, which forces the opponent to discard every single turn and pumps out a 1/1 elf every single time the opponent discards a card. It also played Serrated Arrows, which can distribute 3 -1/-1 counters over the course of a few turns, and Cloud Thresher, which is a 6 mana 7/7 with flash and reach that could wipe the board of small flying creatures. Could also be evoked for less mana if necessary. The sideboard also had Shriek Maw and Oblivion Ring for more board control, and Oblivion Ring can target any non-land permanent, so that's useful for enchantments and artifacts. And then finally, the sideboard had Loxodon Warhammers and Rift Sweepers. The Warhammer gives +3/+0, trample, and lifelink, and Rift Sweeper takes a card from exile and puts it into a player's library, which was useful at the time time for cards with Suspend. And that's the deck. That is Doran Rock. Basically green-black rock in standard, but with a minor white splash for Doran himself. It basically plays like most rock decks though, disrupt the opponent's hand while blowing up their creatures until you can get a big beater in play and start wailing away at your opponent's life total. Though in this case, you could sometimes just win games by getting a turn 2 Doran against decks not running a ton of creatures to block with, so that could happen. Anyway, that's Doran Rock, the deck that won the World Championship in 2007. Now, you are a little bit more familiar with Magic the Gathering's history and another classic deck from years past. If you like this video and want to see more World Championship decks like this, I do have a playlist dedicated to them, and you can find a link to that in the description below. Also consider subscribing, as there will surely be more to come in the future. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.